Welcome to Contradicting the Cosmos, the show where I refute the YouTube atheist, the Cosmic Skeptic. In today's episode, Mr. Cosmic is going to be consistently inconsistent about what it means to be an atheist. Let's begin.
In fact, if you speak to an atheist, I've found that the majority of the time their position is precisely that. There's no way for me to know with any certainty if God exists, and therefore I don't believe in him. Okay, you could prove to me that God exists, and then I'd know that he exists and therefore would believe in him, but until you can do that, my position is neutral. And there you have an agnostic atheist, but still an atheist. And again, this is corroborated by our dictionary definition of the word atheism. If we look at the root words, we split atheism into a, meaning without, and theism, meaning God. So if you live without the influence of a deity, well, you're an atheist.
So, first we point out the mistake Mr. Cosmic made with explaining the origin of atheism. A means without, theos means God, not theism. The ism denotes belief. Theism is the belief in God. Atheism is the belief there is no God. Point 2. Proof is not persuasion. I can prove God exists. That doesn't mean you'll believe me. Just like you can prove the earth is round, doesn't mean a flat earther is going to believe you. So Mr. Cosmic is deceiving himself when he says that if we proved God's existence, he would know. Proving God's existence is not the problem. Persuading you to believe is the problem. And your position is not neutral. There is no such thing as neutrality when it comes to God. Either you believe he does exist or you believe he doesn't exist. As I've stated in earlier videos, there is no such thing as a lack of belief. At least not in the way the atheist used that term.
However, not every atheist falls within this category. Some atheists will tell you that they do actively disbelieve in God. And this leads me on to my next point. Do atheists disbelieve in God, or do they simply lack a belief in God? The answer? Well, both. Again, it depends on who you ask, but there are absolutely people out there who will tell you with certainty that there is no God. And these people often go by the label of anti-theists, but it's important to note that these people represent a subset of atheism. Put it this way, all anti-theists are atheists, but not all atheists are anti-theists. And if we go once again back to our dictionary definition of atheism, we can see that it actually accounts for this. Okay, atheism is either a disbelief, that's anti-theism, or a lack of belief, that's atheism, in God. You can also think of it in terms of this exceedingly well-produced graph, which on the y-axis represents knowledge of there being no God versus no knowledge, and on the x-axis represents disbelief versus belief. You can say that you don't know if there's a God and therefore you don't believe in one, and that makes you an agnostic atheist. You can say that you do know that there is no God and therefore don't believe in one, and that makes you this anti-theist we were talking about. You can say that you don't know if there's a God, but you believe there's a God, and that makes you a theist, or you can say that you know there is no God, but you believe in God, and frankly that just makes you an idiot.
Funny, my graph looks a little different than that. You see here, if you know that God exists and you believe, then you're a theist. If you don't know that God exists and you believe, you're an agnostic theist. If you don't know that God exists and therefore you disbelieve, then you're an atheist. But if you know God exists and you still don't believe, you're an idiot. Alright, now that we got the tit for tat out of the way, let's point out some issues with this. So knowledge is actually defined as true justified belief. So it seems weird that knowledge would be perpendicular to belief on any sort of graph, but since this is supposed to be claims to knowledge, not necessarily actual knowledge, that part is fine. But the big thing to notice here is he has knowledge up top and lack of knowledge on the bottom, but he has belief on one side and disbelief on the other, not a lack of belief. And earlier he made a point to separate disbelief and lack of belief as two different things. But now in this graph he seems to be lumping them both together and contradicting what he said earlier. And who has ever actually called themselves an anti-theist? I've heard other atheists use this term, but I'm pretty sure they probably got it from Cosmic Skeptic. I do not currently know of anybody who self-identifies as an anti-theist.
And you know, a lack of belief in something is not the same as a belief in the opposite. So say you don't believe in God doesn't mean you do believe there is no God. Okay, imagine that I asked my mother, who for all her virtues knows nothing about computers. Imagine I asked her, Do you think that the Dell XPS15 will outperform the new MacBook Pro and see the beginning of the downfall for Apple? Well, she's going to say, no, I don't believe that. And I'll say, oh, so you believe that the MacBook Pro outperforms the Dell? No, of course not. She just doesn't know anything about the topic. And I think here really lies the difference between agnosticism and atheism. An agnostic is someone who says, I know nothing about computing, so I don't believe either way. And an atheist is someone who says, well, actually, I do know a bit about computing, and I don't believe that the Dell is going to outperform the MacBook because I've done my research. And there's your difference.
I believe he just contradicted himself again, where earlier in his graph it was agnostic atheists who didn't know about the subject versus anti-theists who at least claimed to know about the subject. But now he seems to have completely forgotten the term anti-theist and just replaced it with atheist. He's being a bit inconsistent with his definitions. Now about his mother. Mr. Cosmic actually conflated two different beliefs into his question. The first belief, that one computer would outperform the other computer, and the other, that such an outperformance would lead to the downfall of the company. Now, knowing absolutely nothing about computers, she can still have an opinion on which will outperform the other. So if she were to say she lacks belief, which I don't think his mother would actually say that, then she would say that she does not have enough information to form an opinion. An opinion being a belief that is not negated by the opposite belief. In other words, she believes with equal certainty in both outcomes, because she doesn't have enough information to push one belief over the belief of the other. She may form an opinion just based solely on the name. Let's say you ask me if I left my stove on, and I say, I don't believe so. So then you say, so the stove is off. But then I say, I don't believe that either. Does that make sense to you? Because that is complete nonsense. Either the stove is on or the stove is off. You cannot not believe in two contrary positions. You can believe one of them and therefore not believe the other, or you can believe both with equal certainty and therefore just not be sure. But you cannot lack belief in both.
It's unfair to talk about atheism as an active community when really all that atheists are, and the only thing that binds them together, is a disbelief in something.
And now we have more inconsistencies. He says all atheists share a disbelief in God. But earlier, he made a distinction between disbelief and lack of belief, and claimed that anti-theists disbelieve and atheists lack belief. Then he made the claim that all anti-theists are atheists, but not all atheists are anti-theists. Therefore, not all atheists disbelieve. And now he's saying all atheists disbelieve. Mr. Cosmic is not able to keep his own terminology straight. He keeps jumping back and forth.
To get so caught up in the semantics that you try to formulate points of contention based on language really just goes to show that you lack the argumentative ability to employ any kind of arguments with any shred of actual philosophical depth.
Right. It's the atheist who makes the argument that atheism is a lack of belief in an attempt to alleviate themselves of their burden of proof. It is true that it is just an argument about semantics, but when having a debate, you need to be on the same page, or at least attempt to be on the same page. But atheists try to get off the page as much as possible, because they know that much in the same way that disproving air is impossible, that disproving God is also impossible. So rather than take a stance that they would have to defend, they attempt to claim neutrality. But anybody in a truly neutral position, if such a thing actually existed in the case of God, the neutral position would not debate anybody. They would not form arguments for either side. If somebody was truly neutral, they would keep their mouth shut and listen until they felt like they had enough information to form an opinion, at which point they cannot claim neutrality.